On April 25, 2026, Iran's foreign minister left Pakistan without meeting a single American negotiator. Trump canceled his envoy's trip hours later. The ceasefire that was supposed to produce a deal has now collapsed twice. And sitting in the waters around Iran at this exact moment are 3 American aircraft carrier strike groups. The last time the United States assembled this much naval power in one place, a government fell. What happens this time is a different question entirely. 3 carriers. That number matters more than it sounds. The USS Abraham Lincoln has been in the Arabian Sea since January, the first carrier deployed at the start of Operation Epic Fury. It has been enforcing the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports since April 13th, redirecting over 33 vessels in under 2 weeks. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most powerful aircraft carrier ever built, is operating in the Red Sea. The Ford had been at sea since June 2025, accumulating nearly 10 months of continuous deployment. In March, a fire spread through its ventilation system for over 30 hours, sending more than 200 sailors for treatment. It returned to station in mid-April after repairs in Croatia, the USS George H.W. Bush departed Norfolk on March 31st and took the long route, around the Cape of Good Hope, deliberately avoiding the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, where Iranian-backed Houthi forces maintained surveillance over the Bab al-Mandab Strait. It entered the CENTCOM area of operations on April 23rd. Together, these 3 strike groups carry over 200 aircraft, 15,000 sailors and Marines, and 16 guided missile destroyers. That is approximately 41% of all U.S. Navy ships actively deployed at sea worldwide, concentrated around one country. For context on what that number has historically meant, the last time the United States assembled 3 carriers under Central Command was March 2003. What followed is a matter of record, but Iran in 2026 is not Iraq in 2003. And understanding the difference is exactly what explains why 3 carriers are here, what each one is doing, and what Tehran is calculating right now. To understand why this deployment matters, start with a map. Iran sits at the intersection of 3 bodies of water: the Arabian Sea to the south, the Red Sea accessible to the west via the Gulf of Aden, and the Indian Ocean forming the outer perimeter of both. Each U.S. carrier strike group is now positioned on one of those axes, and that geometry is the entire point. The USS Abraham Lincoln controls the eastern approach to the Strait of Hormuz from the Arabian Sea. This is the enforcement position. The Lincoln's air wing and its escorting destroyers are the primary assets intercepting vessels attempting to breach the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports. It was a destroyer from the Lincoln Strike Group, the USS Spruance, that fired multiple 5-inch rounds at the Iranian cargo ship Tuska on April 19th, disabling its engine room before Marines boarded and seized the vessel. The Lincoln has been the tip of the blockade spear since day one. The USS Gerald R. Ford holds the Red Sea, the western flank. Its position places American air power on the opposite side of the Arabian Peninsula, closing Iran's western strategic corridor and maintaining coverage over Yemen, where Iranian-backed Houthi forces have monitored shipping throughout the conflict. The Ford's air wing includes F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters, the most capable strike aircraft currently operating in the theater. The USS George H.W. Bush arrived via the Indian Ocean and closes the final corridor. It is also F-35C capable, meaning 2 stealth-capable carrier decks are now operating from separate axes simultaneously. That creates an interception problem Iran's degraded air defenses cannot solve. They cannot concentrate against a threat arriving from 2 directions at once. Combined, the 3 groups generate 300 to 360 sustained sorties per day with surge capacity exceeding 600 over short periods. The first night of Operation Epic Fury struck targets across 24 Iranian provinces simultaneously. The three-carrier posture is designed to sustain that tempo indefinitely, not for one strike night, but for a campaign. The economic dimension of that geometry is already visible in the numbers. Before the war, 20% of the world's seaborne oil trade passed through the Strait of Hormuz. That traffic has collapsed by 95%. Oil crossed $106 per barrel. One analyst estimated Iran's loss of import and export capacity at $435 million per day. With the Bush closing the Indian Ocean corridor, Iranian-linked vessels have no maritime route left that U.S. forces cannot intercept. The blockade is no longer partial, it is complete. Three carriers are not 3 times 1 carrier. They are 3 separate instruments creating a single closed perimeter, enforced from the air, from the sea, and across every maritime axis Iran has. If you're ready to understand what Iran still has, and what the U.S. is actually planning to hit next, subscribe to Operation Fury. New analysis deploys every week. The Iraq comparison is circulating everywhere in the coverage this week. It deserves an honest 2 minutes. In 2003, 3 carriers preceded a ground invasion that ended a conventional military in 21 days. That is not the model for Iran. No neighboring country is offering its territory as a staging ground for U.S. ground forces. Iran's terrain is mountainous. Its tunnel networks took decades to build, and its population of 90 million cannot be administered the way Iraq's was. What the 2003 comparison does accurately signal is something different and more important. It tells you what 3 carriers communicate to a government facing them. It signals that the United States has committed enough of its deployable naval force to this theater that walking away without a result is no longer a viable option. It is the difference between a threat and a deadline. 3 carriers in 2003 meant Iraq had run out of time. The question now is whether Tehran reads the same message. Here is what the Pentagon's public statements consistently obscure, and what the intelligence picture actually shows. Roughly half of Iran's missile launchers are still intact. That assessment came directly from U.S. intelligence sources reported by CNN in early April, and it contradicts the public narrative of near-total Iranian military degradation. The reason those launchers survived is specific. Iran spent decades hiding them in tunnel networks, underground caves, and on mobile platforms engineered to fire and relocate before a targeting solution can be confirmed. The US and Israel have increasingly shifted to striking tunnel entrances and the bulldozers used to reopen them, not because the launchers inside are destroyed, but because they cannot be reached. The Defense Intelligence Agency director told Congress on April 16th that Iran retains thousands of missiles and one-way attack drones capable of threatening U.S. and partner forces across the region. Defense Secretary Hegseth confirmed publicly that Iran has been moving its remaining assets to new positions during the ceasefire. Those repositioned assets are now the primary target list for Round 2. And drones present a separate problem entirely. Unlike ballistic missiles, which require large production facilities and fixed launch infrastructure, drones can be assembled in dispersed locations and launched from a truck. Eliminating Iran's drone capacity means finding all of them and bombing all of them, which is an objective the U.S. campaign has not come close to achieving. This is what 3 carriers are actually positioned against. Not a defeated military, not a country that has run out of weapons, a country that has absorbed the first campaign, repositioned what survived, and is now waiting to see whether the economic pressure or the political will breaks first, in Tehran or in Washington. The most important sentence in the DIA director's congressional testimony on April 16th had nothing to do with missile counts. It was this: Iran has almost certainly shifted its wartime objectives from basic regime survival to extracting U.S. concessions through control of the Strait of Hormuz. That reframes everything. Iran is not fighting to survive anymore. It is fighting to negotiate from leverage. The Hormuz blockade is not a desperate last act. It is a calculated bargaining position, and the 3 U.S. carriers exist specifically to eliminate that leverage before Iran can use it to force a deal on its own terms. Understanding that objective is what makes Iran's actual path forward legible. The deadlock on a negotiated deal is structural, not accidental. The U.S. will not lift the naval blockade until there is a signed agreement. Iran will not sign an agreement while the blockade is in place. That is not a misunderstanding. It is 2 parties calculating who breaks first. With 3 carriers closing every maritime exit and $435 million per day leaving Iran's economy, the United States is betting that Tehran breaks before Washington does. Iran is betting the opposite, that domestic political pressure, oil prices, and allied fatigue erode American resolve faster than economic strangulation erodes Iranian resistance. Iran has demonstrated it can absorb sanctions for years. But this is not sanctions. This is sanctions plus military degradation, plus the closure of the strait that carries 80% of Iran's own exports. That combination has no historical precedent in Iran's experience. The economic clock is running differently than any previous pressure campaign. Where Iran retains genuine options is in the asymmetric space, and this is where the intelligence picture becomes most relevant. More ship seizures, fast boat harassment of commercial vessels, drone strikes on Gulf energy infrastructure, activation of Iraqi Shia militia networks, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. These are low-cost, high-noise options Iran can sustain without crossing the threshold that would justify a direct response against the 3 carriers. They also serve the negotiating objective, keeping pressure on the global economy and on regional U.S. partners without triggering the full resumption of American air operations. CNN reported this week that U.S. military planners have already identified a specific individual as a primary strike target if the ceasefire collapses. Ahmad Vahidi, the commander-in-chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, described by sources as an active obstructionist in negotiations. The existence of that target list, leaked deliberately, is itself a message to Tehran's leadership. Escalation has personal consequences. The scenario that Iran's leadership fears most is not military defeat. It is internal fracture. Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei took power after his father's assassination with no established political base. The January 2026 protests were the largest in Iran since 1979. U.S. strikes during Operation Epic Fury specifically targeted Basij internal security units, the forces responsible for domestic repression. If the economic pressure deepens and the new supreme leader cannot consolidate authority, the regime does not need to be defeated from outside. It fractures from within. Based on everything the intelligence picture shows, Iran's most likely path is not a clean resolution in either direction. It is continued asymmetric pressure combined with tactical stalling, buying time for the economic and political variables to shift while avoiding the direct escalation that would bring the 3 carriers into full combat posture. That is not a strategy for winning. It is a strategy for not losing fast enough to be forced into an agreement on American terms. The window where Iran negotiates from any position of strength is measured in days, not weeks. What do you think breaks first, Iran's economy or Washington's patience? Drop your read in the comments. 3 carriers around Iran is not a coincidence of deployment schedules. The USS George H.W. Bush did not take the short route through Suez. It went around Africa, deliberately, methodically, closing the last open corridor without announcing it. That is the signal 3 carriers send, not speed, inevitability. Iran's window to negotiate from any position of strength is closing in real time. The economic siege is complete. The repositioned missile assets have been mapped. A new supreme leader with no political capital is watching a ceasefire framework collapse for the second time in 2 weeks. And 200 aircraft are sitting on 3 decks, waiting for an order that has not come. Whether it comes depends on what happens in Tehran in the next 72 hours. The next video covers what the US actually strikes in round 2. The specific targets, the specific weapons, and why the strike plan this time is built entirely differently from February 28th. Subscribe to Operation Fury and hit the bell. That breakdown is the next operation.